Hey everybody, what up? Scuffy here, and today we are going to be going over the Alpha Legion card pool. Alpha Legion, new to the game in the Extermination set. They're actually been out for a couple weeks, so they came out before the full set release, but they are out here now. So let's get into it. Let's take a look here. I'm going to go ahead and break down the full card collection here, which I think I just pulled Alfarius from an event crate, so I'm pretty ecstatic about that. I can make an Alfarius deck and put to use some of these cards that I haven't been using with Peck. The Alpha Legion are really interesting. They're currently, I would probably classify them as one of the few decks who can do control very well in terms of controlling the pace of the game and playing at a different design outside of the traditional fast face damage. They have a lot of tricks. Some are more useful than others. Some of them are more laying the grounds for a long-term plan or approach. On the other hand, there is also a lot of random factors into their playstyle too, which kind of makes it a little bit different when you're playing Alpha Legion, whether you're the opponent or you're the player itself. So sometimes it's just tricky it's just tricky to anticipate either which way. So let's take a look here. First off, Alfarius is the Primarch. He's actually one of two Primarchs. You'll see he's got a secret identity and he's got secret twin. Now instead of Whispers of Chaos or Reckoning, because technically the Alpha Legion never gave in to chaos. They had their own motives for joining Horus during the Heresy. They've got secret identity, they've got secret twin. Your opponent draws a card as his ability for 1 energy and put a copy of it in your hand. So in a way it's kind of like a twisted Jubok, you could kind of say. Your opponent is getting the card as well. They're drawing it though, and that plays into a lot of strategies that the Alfarius deck and Alpha Legion in general can employ. But you're getting a copy of it, so you know what they're going to have, and at the same time you gain it, and then they know that you have it, which sometimes can be pretty disturbing if you happen to get like a copy of Pride of the Emperor or Armor of Mars. Let's take a quick look at the secret identities here. We'll go to all cards and show the stuff that isn't on display, which is basically secret twin. So this is what Alfarius starts out and play with. It starts with 12 costs. Your Warlord becomes a Megon, heal 5, stun the enemy Warlord, and each turn this goes down in cost by 1, and then you become a Megon. Now Megon is obviously Alfarius' twin, Primarch. His ability is 2 energy, take control of an enemy troop with a secret order. His initiative is medium. Currently, all the Alpha Legion warlords are initiative medium, which I think is smart. I think that's the way it should be, because of their secret identity. We'll get into that here in just a sec. So his ability here, you got Alfarius, who draws cards. You've got a Megon who plays with secret orders. What are secret orders? Well, we'll get into secret orders as well. We're going to get into everything because it's crazy. It's crazy. Now, the secret identity is basically the secret identity. When you start the game, does it give me Alpha Legion? Did I scroll past that? You actually, regardless of what warlord you start the game with, whether it's Alfarius, Peck, or Dynat, you actually start the game as Alpha Legionary. So you're actually starting as a 230, and every one of them has the same ability, 1 energy, create a random trap card in your hand, initiative medium. And then starting in your hand, similar to a secret twin, is a secret identity card. It's a purple bordered card. It's a 0 cost card, and it basically it turns your legionary into the actual warlord that you've selected, and then you also draw a card. So it's a free card draw, and then it's kind of a way to switch. If you are Alfarius, you gain 10 health. If your secret identity is Peck, you gain 5 health. If it's Dynat, you're not gaining any health, you're just switching up. And I'm not really sure. I don't think he draws an additional card or anything like that. I haven't played with Dynat really a bit at all, so I think that you just change from one to the other. So when the load screen happens in a game, normally you see your opponent's warlord and you can kind of anticipate. When an Alpha Legion opponent appears, it's just Alpha Legionary. You have no idea who you're facing until they reveal their secret identity. But it gets even crazier than that, because they can, through the course of the game and through the course of a certain card, change their secret identity. Not just with Alfarius turning into a Megon, but Peck can reveal his secret identity, which could then reveal him to be Dynat, and then he might have another secret identity which could reveal him to be Alfarius, and then Alfarius can reveal himself to be a Megon. It gets pretty complicated, it gets pretty crazy, and at the same time, as confusing and frustrating as that can be as the opponent, it can be equally confusing and kind of a gamble as a player, depending on how your deck is going and what you are hoping to get with your secret identity switcheroo. So we'll get into that here in a little bit when we get to the one of many card. But first, let's take a look at Armless Dynat. So his ability is actually not a bad ability. It's 2 energy, deal 2 damage to a troop, and stun it. Doesn't damage the warlord, but it is kind of like a Loken, kind of like a Nev ability, but you're also stunning the troop. This is really great late game against those high attack value troops. You could basically ping and stun a any of the 8 cost, 9 cost troops that people like to drop, and they're not going to be able to do anything to you. And at the same time, it actually allows you, with them being stunned, if you're employing secret orders, you can put secret orders on that troop, have them stunned, and it makes it harder for your opponent to get rid of those secret orders. But it's not a bad ability. I don't normally start the game as Dynat. However, there are certain points in a game where I'm hoping through the course of one of many that I switch my personality to Dynat if the board is getting too much and I want to control or lock down one specific troop. Ingo Peck. Now, I have got a Peck deck. I've been playing Peck for quite a while, basically since day one with the Alpha Legion, getting a feel of it, and I enjoy it. It's really fun. The Secret Order deck is really interesting. Now, his ability is for 1 energy. He can create a random secret order in your hand. We'll take a look at the secret orders here in just a second. They're very powerful cards that by themselves aren't so great unless you're lucky enough to get a particular one that you need to counter your opponent's strategy. But together, if you have several of them on the board, on troops, whether it's one troop or multiple troops, they start to gain strong foothold and start to really oppress your opponent's board. And then on top of that, they're just frustrating and tricky to your opponent. You put a secret order on their troop, they don't know what that secret order is until it triggers. And some of them, they don't want to trigger. And then when they don't trigger, then they think they're relieved, and then it turns out it's the other one that they didn't want either, and then they get frustrated. So it's a very tricky way to play with Peck if you're relying on secret orders. You can play Alpha Legion without relying on secret orders or traps. I don't know if they would be super effective if you're just going for the classic troops and damage. The Alfarius deck, currently that is gaining steam, is a heavy card draw harrowing deck, and we'll take a look at harrowing here in a second. That's actually applicable to all the warlords, but Alfarius more importantly because he can force the draw with his ability. There's 3 to 5 ways currently just within the Legion card pool to play Alpha Legion. If you start mixing in more and more of the neutral stuff, then it really opens up even further. So, Infiltration. Now, this tactic here creates a copy in your hand of each trap put in your opponent's deck for 1 energy. It's a great cost, and I like the artwork. It's very subtle, it looks like it is kind of an infiltration approach. But I don't like... I like the cost, and I like the ability, but the way it currently stands, the usefulness for this card is very low. Traps compared to secret orders, we'll take a look here just shortly with traps, are not as reliable. They're just not. So, including that card, if you're building around traps, I don't think you'll get the good payoff that you're hoping for. Now, Sleeper Operative. This is a good card for probably half of the Alpha Legion builds. Number one, it's a 1 energy troop. It's a 1/3. When you draw a card, you deal 1 damage to your Warlord. However, the rally effect is give this troop to your opponent and stun it. So what you're actually doing is you're putting this troop on your opponent's side of the board and stunning it. And that means for the first turn, they'll draw a card and they'll take a damage. And then the second turn, they'll draw a card and they'll take a damage. And they might have the chance to attack with this. They'll do 1 damage to you. And then the third turn, they'll draw a card and they'll take a damage. And that's just through the course of their natural card drawing at the start of their turn. It's a trade-off, 3 damage to them for 2 damage to you if this attacks your Warlord both times. However, if you're playing Alfarius or some of the other card draw decks, or your opponent is playing a deck that relies heavily on card drawing, this is going to do more damage than that. And that 3-to-2 ratio can quickly elevate into a 5-to-2 or even a 7 or 8-to-2 card ratio. That's not a bad trade-off, and that's if you don't have him stunned a second time. And as you'll see, the Alpha Legion have a variety of stun options, which can help keep this pesky little guy on the board. So he's a good card. If you see him in the shop as a rare, it's a good buy. If you don't have it, or if you've got 1, you need to have 2 to really take advantage of it in the proper deck. I'd recommend they are a good card. Cultists. Now this is interesting. So far, let's take a look here. Sleeper Operative and Cultists. This is the first, the Alpha Legion is the first, and so far, currently, the only Legion card faction that has non-legionary, non-Astartes in their faction, which is because the Alpha Legion employed, they employed saboteurs, they employed human operatives, they employed all strategies of warfare to do their dirty work. They weren't just, content with just doing the standard drop pod assault. That's how they wage war. So the cultist ability is very, very interesting as well. At the end of your turn, deal 1 damage to all enemies. So it's a 2-drop, basically a free frag grenade at the end of every one of your turns. Now they've got a low health, so they might not survive more than a turn, but the disruption damage that they can do, coupled with a defensive satellites or a volcanic instability, and then throw down a cultist, and then you've just done more damage to your opponent, 3 damage to their side of the board, whatever hits, and then cultist down on the board. Now you just did 4 for 5 damage, or for 5 energy, which is the same cost as the defensive satellites. You might have taken some yourself on your Warlord, but just the same, or you happen to have 4 or 5 is a little bit extreme, but let's say you've got 2 or 3 frontline troops and you can park a cultist behind them, and they manage to splash out that damage 2 or 3 turns before your opponent can get rid of them. They're a common, but they're a very good common. They're very versatile. They do damage, and they're a body troop. Now, what's important to note here for me, and for secret orders, which we're 1 row away from getting into, is both the Sleeper Operative and the Cultist have low attack. Low attack is actually semi-important with the Secret Order deck. Not necessarily the same for everything, but if you have troops out there with lower attack, it makes it harder for your opponent to get rid of their troop with the Secret Order on it. Now, Siriaris squad has got the rally. Both players draw a card. So already here, you can kind of see between this guy and this guy, at a 3 cost, you can see how this is going to do damage. You're going to give your opponent that troop. You're going to draw a card. You get the card. They take a damage. And at the start of their turn, they take another damage. Now you've just escalated that 3-to-2 ratio to a 4-to-2 ratio. And then you throw in Alfarius' ability. It goes on from there. As far as 2 costs go, that's their low cost troop options. And you've got Hurtado Bronzi, who's a legendary, who's a good legendary, but he's actually not a start the game legendary for his cost. But that's their low cost options. They're not bad. Their health is very basic, but that ability is only good for a certain type of player if you're looking for a card or you're trying to build into something the next round over. So whether or not you include them in your deck, whether they're crucial or not, that's up to you. But they're a good card. I would prefer Cultist over the card drawing, even though it's a nice combo, doing 1 damage to everything as opposed to 1 damage to the Warlord and giving them a card sometimes is a better trade-off. So let's take a look at traps here. Hang on a second, I've got to blow my nose here, so I'll be right back. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at traps. Now, what are traps? Traps are a tactic that is actually inserted. Trap adds a secret card to your opponent's deck. Your opponent doesn't see what card it is. They just simply see trap when you play the card, and that card goes into their deck. It actually increases their deck, cards in deck that they have. When they draw this card, it triggers this ability as if it was their own card. So trap, when drawn, for instance, enemy within, deal 5 damage to your Warlord, and then draw a card. Now, you might think that the draw card, like, oh, I just gave him a card, I'm not taking a card away. Yes and no. Number one, if your opponent had no cards in hand and they just drew your traps, that would be too powerful. But number two, what this actually allows you to do, if you're lucky, and luck is the important thing here, if you've got multiple traps in your opponent's deck, it's possible for them to draw one, and then because it says draw a card, that leads them to draw more cards, which could include another trap, which might say draw a card, which lets them draw another trap, and you could have 3 or 4 traps trigger in one turn before they start their turn. That's pretty powerful. This is probably, in my opinion, this is my favorite trap, obviously just because it just does 5 damage to your Warlord. That's strong. If you can get 2 or 3 of these in their deck, there's 15 damage to their Warlord sitting in their cards that they are eventually going to come across. Now, whether or not it happens before the end of the game, that's where that luck factor comes into, and that's why traps are not as reliable. If you know what trap you're putting in, you know when it's going to come up at some point in time, but there's no guarantee. I've played games when the Alpha Legion first debuted to test it out. I mean, I played games where there was 19, 21 cards in a deck, and they drew a trap. They drew the one trap that I put in there. Then I've had games where they were down to 9 cards, and out of those 9 cards, 6 were traps that I put in, and they still hadn't drawn any traps in a game, and that's really high, man. That's a 66% chance that they're going to draw a trap and not drawing a trap. They're not something to build on. Traps aren't. They're great. Their effects are very strong. All of their effects are very strong because they're not something to rely on. So if you build a traps in your deck, your rest of your deck needs to be stronger. Now, false flag is probably the second best, if you ask me, the second best trap. When drawn, stun all your units and draw a card. That's powerful. If that comes up at the right turn, and it's great when it does, your opponent's entire board is stunned. And let's just say you've let them build up their entire board, so they've got 7 units on their side. 7 units are stunned, and they can't play any more cards unless they've got a tactic or something in their hand. It buys you a turn. And if you've got several of those in your opponent's deck, you've got the potential to buy yourself several turns through the course of a game. However, it still falls into that, is it reliable? It's not reliable. I like it when traps happen, but you can't bank on them. And I've had one game, probably the best instance of I wasn't banking on it and it came up, and I think it was like three of the enemy within triggered 1, 2, 3, and it was 15 damage to finish off the opponent's Warlord, and I was like 1 health. That was the long shot. That was the odds of it happening were not high at all. And it happened, and it was like, oh, there's no way. That's great. It was great to see, but it was not. It was like the Hail Mary, You want to see it happen, but odds are it's just not going to happen. Now, Hurtado Bronzy increases to some degree. He increases the ability. He's actually really great. He's a good legendary. First off, he's a 2-cost. Now his stats, again, low. He's a human. He's an infantry. When you play a trap card, add a copy of it to your hand. And rally, add a random trap to your hand. So, again, he's not a card that you actually want to start the game off with. Number one, because he's very disposable and then you lose his ability. His ability is like a massive boost. Let's say you've got 10 energy. You play Hurtado Bronzy, he gives you a trap. You can play that trap 4 times in that turn and still have a copy of the trap left over to play on your next turn. And if your opponent doesn't or can't get rid of Bronzy on their turn, you could do that again. You can do that again. He quickly becomes a target because your opponent doesn't want to have, 8+ traps sitting in their deck. Now, depending on the trap that he generates, that's kind of hard to say. I mean, he might give you the lowest level effective trap. It's not the one that you're looking for. He might give you the enemy within trap, and then you could pump in technically 20 damage to your opponent's warlord in their deck. So he's good, but he's not good early game. He's good late game. If you have him in your starting hand, I would strongly recommend cycling him out. He's not one to keep. He's one you want to draw into. Now, Hydra Dominatus is probably the third, I'd probably say the third most desired trap. It's very basic. When drawn, destroy a random friendly troop. So it's not going to do anything to your opponent if they don't have any troops on the board. Angron, or any solo warlord, or even that turn where you've cleared their board magically, or your opponent has sacked all their troops. Then this comes up and it just doesn't trigger. It doesn't do anything. It's worse if it happens to destroy, say, a troop that you put a bunch of secret orders on. So it has its moments, which is why it's not as desirable for me. Now, if you're not playing with secret orders, maybe it's not so bad. Seeds of Betrayal. Now, this one is it's 2-sided. I like all the pictures on this, by the way, all the banners. You might say, trap, win, draw 3 more cards. Why is that good? Well, that's the whole point of this trap, actually, is to further the designs of the other traps. If you've got, let's say, 4 or 5 traps in your opponent's deck of the other types, and you happen to have a Seeds of Betrayal in your opponent's deck, you have increased the chance of them drawing those other traps sooner by drawing the 3 cards. Or you could have Seeds of Betrayal with the Sleeper Operative. You could have Seeds of Betrayal with a full hand. So if they've got 10 cards in their hand and then they have to draw 3 cards, those are 3 cards that aren't actually going to their hand. They're just going out of their life deck. You could have Seeds of Betrayal with Pale Spear, which is a legendary upgrade. We'll take a look at it here in a second. Now, keep in mind, Alfarius can make your opponent draw those traps, and he puts a copy of it in his own hand. So if he puts a trap out there, makes his opponent draw a trap, he gets a copy of that trap to put back into their hand, again, because he hasn't drawn it. He's probably your best bet to go with traps, but it's not a good bet. Again, that's a hard late game to actually rely on. It's not reliable at all. And if you're just relying on the Alpha Legionary to generate traps and not have traps in your hand, then you're really a gambling man, because I'll tell you, that's tricky, because you could technically generate nothing but this card here, and that might seem great until you give your opponent just more cards than you've got in your hand early on in the game. Now, Aleph Null Veteran, I actually like these guys a lot. This is another Alpha Legion ability to stun. They can stun an enemy troop, and they're a 3/3. It works great for putting a secret order on a troop. It works great for holding off a high attack or high devastating unit on the opponent's side. It's still a 3-cost, so you can play other cards with it and use it on your next turn, or have your opponent try to get rid of it because they're afraid of it. It has a lot of uses. That stun ability is very useful, especially with the Alpha Legion. So there's a common, I usually run 2 of these there, and they're probably, I mean, if you look at it, they're probably mid of the bar. I mean, there's 4 3-cost troops for Alpha Legion, and I'd probably rank those guys at number 2, maybe number 3. It depends on your deck. Now let's get into the secret orders. Now, the secret orders, they're secret. How do they work? Now, we've already kind of talked about that. You add a secret ability to your enemy infantry or Astartes, depending on what the order is. Now, this secret order here is when attacking a troop, swap places with that troop instead. That's interesting. It has its uses. Either your opponent is going to attack you, or they're going to attack one of your troops. And if they think they're going to get rid of one of your troops, you end up with their troop, whether it's a good troop or not. Hopefully it's a good troop because you're the one putting these secret orders on, so you should know what troop it is. And then you can use that troop to attack your opponent's warlord instead, or get your guy back, whatever you want. Now, it's interesting to note, if you have 2 alpha orders on a troop, the first alpha order triggers, and they switch, and the second one triggers while it's on your side of the table, so they switch back. So it's possible to render a opponent's troop useless with 2 alpha orders and a gamma order. What is gamma order? Well, we're going to get there. Let's take a look at delta order first. Delta order is at the end of each of your turn, deal 2 damage and stun your warlord. Now that is powerful. And note that all these are considered tactics, so these are affected by cards like Shield Generator or orbital. What's the Salamanders one? Or is it Orbital Bombardment? Orbital Combat. Orbital Combat. They are tactics, but they're secret orders specifically because they kind of act like effects. Dealing 2 damage to your opponent's warlord is nice. Stunning them is even better. And if you happen to have Delta Order on, say, a troop that can attack, or that has Gamma Order on it and they can't attack your warlord, they're locked, and they're gonna constantly, for the rest of the game, until they get rid of that troop somehow, some way, are going to have their warlord stunned. And that is devastating against certain warlords. Erlin, Korax, Angron, Kurz, Numian. I mean, ones that aren't necessarily, offensive, but just that you can build a deck around. Santar's got a great ability to get rid of his own troops because his ability works on any troop, not just the enemy troops. But if you're stunning your opponent's warlord, you've shut down half of their options every turn, because that's one thing that they had guaranteed every turn, and now they don't. Gamma Order. Now, Gamma Order, if you ask me, there's a reason why it's rare as opposed to epic. Although Alpha Order is epic, it's not the first one I want. I want Gamma Order. Secret Order, when attacking your enemy warlord, damage yours instead. That sums it up in a nutshell. You basically just turned your opponent's troop into your troop for a turn. Once they do that and they realize that it's not that the Gamma Order's on there, they're not going to try to attack your troop anymore. They're not going to try to attack your warlord. They're going to try to attack your troop, and that's why you want either those low attack troops on your side of the table, which means that they can kill your guy, but they're not going to kill theirs, or you want to stun those guys with Gamma Order while you have troops on the board, or you want to have that Alpha Order times 2 on there, because then they can't attack your troops, they can't attack your warlord, and they've got a troop that just sits there. So now that's the secret orders. There's 3 secret orders. What are ways to work around? What are the problems with secret orders? Secret orders right now, and for their design, cannot be deployed on vehicles. They cannot be deployed on demons. They cannot be deployed on structures, and then obviously they cannot be deployed on warlords. So if your opponent has those cards out on their side of the table, there's nothing. Your secret orders, you can't give them to anybody. There's no one to give them to. Now that's why Sleeper Operative is useful for a secret order deck, because you can put a troop on their side of the table and then give it a secret order on top of that. And if you can get Sleeper Operative and Gamma Order out, and then Omega Order, we haven't got to Omega Order. Delta Order, let's do one last secret order, and this is kind of the board lock secret order. Deal 3 damage to troops you put in play. And this stacks. So if you've got several Omega Orders on various troops of your opponent's side, if they can put in a 7 health troop and 3 of them trigger, they lose 3, they lose 3, and they lose 3, and that 7 health troop is... sorry. Survivor, doesn't matter. If it does 9 damage, it does 9 damage. Omega Order locks the board. Your ideal situation, and putting too many secret orders on one troop is not a good idea, but if you can have Gamma Order, a Delta Order, or Delta Order or 2, and then 2 Omega Orders out, at that point you've pretty much locked the game. You don't even have to play any troops on your side of the table. You can focus on going for the building up for the coup de grace, because that's really going to wrap things up. That's going to make it hard for them to play anything, and anything that they do play is going to be susceptible to what else you've already got on the table. Secret orders can be very powerful, but they don't start out powerful. They rely on your opponent playing the right cards to play. They rely on your opponent buying into what you've factored in there, or not being able to get rid of that troop, whether it's through an Ambassador Melgator or a suicidal, strike, or you burn in a tactic to get rid of their own troop. And then obviously it relies on having those guys sit out there longer for you to reap the benefits of them using their secret orders. It's fun to pay off when you see it happen. But it's not like a sweeping victory. For the most part, usually when that happens, it's still a very good close game, because your opponents are playing other cards, direct damage cards. They're using their Warlord as much as they can. So you can still have a good game, but you have to give up that thought process and let the cards that are on your opponent's side of the table do the work for you, if that makes sense. Now, Ghost Legionary is an epic. These guys gain +1/+1 when your opponent draws a card. Right off the bat, I shouldn't have to show you. I mean, that's very obvious. 3 troop. It starts as a 2/3 on your opponent's turn. It immediately becomes a 3/4. If you've used Alfarius, it becomes a 3/4 on your turn. You can use Levictio Divinatus, and your opponent is drawing a card, and it goes up. Any abilities is drawing a card. These guys can quickly get out of hand. They're not bad for a standard approach or an attack approach. Your opponent wants to deal with these as quickly as they can, because otherwise, every turn, they're going to go up by at least +1/+1. Because if you're playing a certain deck that is relying on your opponent drawing cards, then you are playing cards like Sirius Squad to force them to draw more cards and make these guys stronger. Now, Herzog Squad, these guys here, going into secret orders, they've got a backlash ability, draw a secret order from your deck. Now, on the half hand, you might think, well, I want as many secret orders as I can get, and I strongly discourage it. Unless you're playing, unless you don't have access to Peck, these guys are not the best idea for you. Number one, they're drawing a secret order from your deck. That means it's a tutor, which is not a bad thing, but there are better options. There's better ways. You want to be able to create it for free. You want to be able to copy it if you can. Drawing it just eliminates the potential that you'll ever be able to have an additional copy of it. Having more than one copy of a card than you have in your deck is always a better thing. Number two, it's a backlash effect. So these guys have to die. Number three is their attack. So even if you're relying on a secret order build, let's say, that attack of 4 means that if you played a secret order, it's very possible that your opponent can throw the troop that has a secret order on them at the Herzog Squad, kill your squad, kill that nuisance troop, and yeah, you get a secret order, but you've got to start up all over again. So I opt out from using those guys. I do, however, use the Honorius Rhino, and for the reasons that I just listed, these reasons are even better. Number one, frontline, which is great. It's very important to be able to protect your Warlord, because if you're playing a secret order deck, you don't have too many troop options, and you're going to take some hits to the face. So having a frontline troop, that's good. Number two, this is a rally effect instead of a backlash effect. This puts a copy of it in your hand of a secret order. So instead of drawing the secret order from your deck, you're getting a copy of it. So having these in your opening hand is as good as having a secret order in your deck. Because you're going to get it when you play these guys out there. And if you know, let's say you've built your deck with one or two secret orders, you're not going to get a random one. You're going to get one that particularly ties into how you are playing your deck. Whether it's Delta, whether it's Gamma or Omega, you already know what you want. You've built the other 29 cards in your deck around that concept. Honorius Rhino simply doubles down on it and gives you an additional copy of it. It's very possible with 2 Honorius Rhinos, plus potentially either a Warlord ability or just the cards in your hand to end up with 4+ copies of the secret order that you've built your deck around. Meaning, the other cards that you built your deck around become that much more effective because your secret orders are much more abundant. A great card. If you're looking to do secret orders, consider Honorius Rhino. If you're not, then there's other options. There's other better frontline 3-cost options. But for Alpha Legion secret orders, that's probably your best bet. We've looked at Omega Order. Let's look at the Dargani Sergeant. He is once again another troop that ties into secret orders. Now he, at the end of your turn, adds a random secret order to your hand. He's kind of like a Jubok for secret orders. He's giving you a free card. It's a copy, but it's random. That might seem good. And maybe it's good for, like, let's say you're going for the Alfarius Omega on Switch, where you just need a secret order. It doesn't matter what it is. However, that attack 4 is really what breaks it for me if I'm going for that particular, I want as few troops on the board as possible that my opponent can use to purge themselves of their secret orders. And even with the 3 health, I don't think he would last longer than just to give you 1 free secret order. And for the cost of 4, you could just use a Peck ability for 1 energy and get a secret order, and then play additional cards. So that's why I opt out of Dargani Sergeant. It's not bad. I don't think it's for a deck that's built on secret orders. Just a deck that can utilize secret orders in a pinch to help out. Now, Decimus Squad. These guys go back to traps. Deal 2 damage to the enemy warlord when your opponent draws a trap. So if you're really bent on playing traps, and these guys are common, you can throw these out there. They're just otherwise a 4/4, but they're 4/4 with a potential of dealing 2 damage to your opponent's warlord if they draw a trap. If you really ask me, the stats are not bad, but the ability and the randomness of it, I would just pass on these guys. I would pass on these guys and instead opt for Fortuna Squad. 1 less attack, and yes, he's a rare as opposed to a common, but his rally effect is great. Deal 2 damage, and if your opponent has more than 5 cards in hand, stun the target. And, unless you are playing at a level where everybody's just dumping in cards in their hand, or they have a lot of cheap cards, not a lot of card drawing options, more than likely through the course of most of your games, your opponent is going to have 5 cards plus in hand. So with the rest of the Alpha Legion, it's very easy to push them over that 5-card limit, drop Fortness, stun a unit, which could be the Warlord, could be the one big troop that they've got on their side, and now you've got guys on the table, you've got stun stuff on the table. If they're stunned with the secret order, it keeps them around a little bit longer. Just a lot of options here. I like these guys a lot. Now, let's talk about one of many. This is probably, I would probably say, definitely a must-have if you're playing Alpha Legion. This is an epic. Your Warlord becomes Alpha Legionary. Heal 5, create another Alpha Legion Warlord in your hand. Now, what does that mean? Create another Alpha Legion Warlord. What it means is, this is a heal 5 to your Warlord. Return your Warlord back to the Alpha Legionary state. Not with the 30 health, just whatever health that you're at with a +5. And then it gives you a new secret identity. But it's a random secret identity. You might have the same secret identity that you started the game with. You might end up with one of the other guys. Let's say you started the game as Dynat. Maybe you end up getting Alfarius. Wow, you can change from Alfarius to Dynat and heal 5? That's cool. Yes, but there's more than that. That secret identity for Alfarius also gives you 10 health. So for 4, you could potentially gain 15 health and change your Warlord's ability. Now, there's a lot of people who have encountered this card talking about it. There's a lot of people, such as myself, who have played the card, who have some counter to it. I'm not going to defend the card. I think it can be tweaked slightly. I think its ability can be very powerful. It can be very frustrating if you're as an opponent and you just watch your enemy heal for 15 health for the cost of 4 energy. That's pretty crazy. Now, it counters on the fact of randomness. It means that they have to create Alfarius as opposed to creating Dynat, because Dynat would give them 0 health. Peck would give you 5 additional health, which is still 10 health for 4. 10 health for 4, or the current argument, the biggest argument, is 7 health for 6 that goes up and returns to your hand. Is that good or is it not good? I think it is powerful. I think the heal 5 could be heal 3 or heal 4. I think if it's too much less than that, it's not as reliable. The creating a alternate warlord changes who your warlord is. Now it's, and before I go further, I should clarify. If you get Ingopek or you get Dynat, okay, that changes maybe the focus of your deck if you weren't already those guys. If you're already Peck and you get Peck again, you get the additional health, but you are already on track. You're already doing that. If you're Peck and you go to Dynat, you don't gain any additional health, but you have further options to stun troops. So they go hand in hand. If you're Dynat and you get Alfarius, not only do you get Alfarius, you get Alfarius's secret twin ability, meaning you also can become Omegon. So for cost of 4, you heal 5, you can potentially gain more health, and then you can potentially gain more health on top of that. That's a lot of ifs, and that's a lot of potentialities. And the Alpha Legion, I don't want to say they thrive on it, and they certainly don't rely on it. It's as much as a obstacle as it is a wonderful experience when randomness of the Alpha Legion comes together for a player. As much as they can control it, cards like One of Many doesn't give you a choice. It simply happens. It can be tweaked. I think it does need to be tweaked to some degree because of some of the vocals. The opposite argument of it, and the biggest one that I say, besides what I just mentioned in terms of lots of ifs, lots of potentials, I mean, technically you could have a defensive satellites hit 7 units for 4. You could also have a defensive satellites hit 7 units for 1. It's happened. It can happen. It's just the nature of randomness. But the Alpha Legion also, as we've seen, this is a 4 cost. There's some good troops here, but there's not a lot of offensive high attack troops within the Legion card pool for Alpha Legion early game, 3 to 4. So a 4 cost tactic might be beneficial at turn 10 because through the course of turns 1 through 6, and maybe that's a little bit too, 1 through 4, the Warlord took a pretty extreme beating before it started to gain its pieces of its noose on the board. It's a must-have, not just because of the healing potential, because of the nature of switching up in the middle of a game can throw your opponent off. The healing nature is a big deal, but switching your opponent, your Warlord up is actually bigger than you think. But that healing nature is much more important at the current state. And this is Alpha Legion has not been nerfed or errated yet. They're still in their raw first release form. It's kind of a necessity to that degree because that 1 or 2 extra health that I'm talking about, I'm not talking about the extra health gained from switching to Alfarius or Peck, is important. I've had games where I've played 2 One of Manys and still lost. I've had games where I played 2 One of Manys and won by 2 health, and it was just enough to keep me alive. And those aren't games that I switched into Alfarius and switched into Alfarius. Those are games where I switched into Dynat and switched into Peck, or switched into Dynat, switched into Dynat. So all I'm gaining is the health from one of many, which is not bad, but it's not great. It's not, certainly wasn't what I hoped for, what I wanted for. I mean, we all want to draw that card that we need that first turn, that we needed. So the reliance on the card, because of the fragility of the first part of the stage of the Alpha Legion game plan, they kind of go hand in hand. Now, you can play Alpha Legion without one of many, and you can do just fine. But you're not going to have a reliance on the Alpha Legion tactics as much, I don't think. I think you utilize more neutral cards. I think you utilize a lot more direct damage cards. If you want to play Alpha Legion with majority of your Alpha cards being from Alpha Legion, then you do need to rely on one of many. And that's fine. That's half of the fluff and flavor of the Legion. That's half of the dynamic. That's the confusion. Just when you think you killed Alfarius, it turns out that wasn't Alfarius. And then it turns out later down the road that the guy that you drove by going to the 7-Eleven was Alfarius all along. That's how they play. You can play them without playing Alpha Legion. I mean, technically, we all start out the game as Loken playing with a bunch of neutral stuff and a few Sons of Horus cards. You can play it like that, but you won't do as well. You can play Alpha Legion and do fairly well, or you can play Alpha Legion with all the tools that the Alpha Legion employs and do better. Now, are they top tier? Alpha Legion currently are not. They're still not. They could be, I think, if some other changes are made to the cards that are being utilized by the top tier decks. But until Alpha Legion dominates the game with one of many, I don't think it's a broken card. I think it could, if they changed it to heal 4 instead of heal 5, I wouldn't complain. If they changed it to heal 3 instead of heal 5, I'd be a little sad, but I'd still include both copies of it in my deck because of its use of switching up my Warlord mid-game. Even just the additional heal, that's nice, but healing 3 and then switching my tactic or having the ability now to stun a troop or force my opponent to draw cards and get a copy of that card could be very important. Very important. So if they changed anything beyond that, I think at that point, I don't think Alpha Legion would be... I just don't... I think that's a very strong linchpin as far as where they stand right now in the game. They do need it if you want to play as Alpha Legion. And does that mean that maybe the other cards within their card pool need to be improved? Maybe. If they improved other cards between the 2 to 3 range and then reduce the cost of one of many, maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing. But time will tell. We'll see. Okay. Sorry, I had to get a drink of water here. Because talking about one of many makes me thirsty for victory. I think I've said all I can say about one of many. It's a great card. If you see it in the shop and you want to play Alpha Legion, pick it up. Saboteur Squad. Now, this ability is really cool, especially with some of the cards that we've seen released with the Extermination set. Rally, reduce your opponent's maximum energy by 1. Late game, not as effective. If it's already, your opponent's already at 10 energy, that's really not going to break them. But if you can get this out at turn 4, or even turn 5, you put them behind a turn, that hurts. If you can get 2 of these guys out, one after the other, your opponent is now down 2 turns. And if you happen to have Saboteur Squad, Asteroid Belt as your starting, gain 1 energy, then you play Saboteur Squad, then you play another Saboteur Squad, you are up 3 turns to your opponent. And that's really, really damaging at that point because you're limiting what they can play, obviously. That goes up big. You're able to play 2 to 3 cards now, or 1 really good card, and they can only play 1 not so good card or use an ability. But it further amplifies, let's say, the Alfarius design, where he's putting more cards into their hand, more cards than they can use at the time, which just works further in your favor down the road for the Harrowing. Now their stats are very low. It's a 2/3. They're easily disposed. They can be chunked off. They can be seek and destroyed. They can, Abaddon can get rid of these guys. There's nothing big, but that rally effect is very important. I think their cost wise is appropriate. As a one of, I wouldn't include one of these in my deck. As a two of, and I'm building around that design to reduce the energy or to be at a higher level, that's pretty powerful and that's a good effect. So if you're looking to build a certain deck, they're good. If not, you don't have to have these guys. Now, Asorius Squad, these guys here have a backlash. Good stats, nice art, 5/5. Copy, backlash, add a copy of a trap you played this game to your hand. Again, we're getting into traps, and I've already said as far as with regards to traps, that randomness factor, are they something worth relying on? But this guy further amplifies that because you have to have played a trap this game. On the plus side, he adds a copy of a trap, so you're not drawing it from your deck, and if you know what traps you've played, you know what he's going to give you. But he's not great. If you're looking for just bodies on the table, he'll give you a body on the table as a 5/5. That's a decent stat line. But it's nothing to rely on. And as a backlash, it just gives you a copy of a trap. It doesn't give you one in your hand right away. It doesn't put one in your opponent's deck right away. I think if they change this as a rally effect, add a copy of a trap you played this game to your opponent's deck, that would be much more important. That would be much more effective, and then that would amplify the trap concept for the Alpha Legion. But as it currently stands, it's okay if you don't have enough Alpha Legion cards. Otherwise, I'd pass on it. Now, Headhunter Squad, these guys are good. These guys are good for a variety of reasons. Obviously, very, very basic right off the bat. You can tell sneak attack, which, that's powerful. Rally, if your opponent has more than 5 cards in hand, gains stealth. And we've already said how easy that can happen. Now, there's times that you can't get him out there. Then you still have a 6/4 with sneak attack on the table. That's a good stat line. And sneak attack, okay, I'll take it. Having stealth is just the icing on the cake at that point. Now, why is it good for them to have stealth? Well, depending on your approach to the game and your deck. Maybe it's nice to have a unit with stealth if you've got secret orders on your opponent's troops, because then they can't attack that Headhunter Squad right away. And then you get a free attack on your opponent's Warlord before they're able to throw guys at the Headhunter Squad. Not a bad card. Not a bad card. It's a little costly for the cost of 5, but it's a good card. And I like the artwork too. Now, Hydra's heads. This is an interesting ability. First off, it's a Rhino with a crazy stat line here. I think it's actually, maybe it's supposed to be a Razorback. Oh, it looks like a Stormbolter. So I'm going to say that's a crazy stat line for a Rhino. Possessed Rhino. Oh, there you go. That explains it. It's a possessed Rhino. Because the Alpha Legion just use everything, man. They don't care. Whatever will win. Relentless, both players draw a card. Now, that's at the start of your turn. But with that stat line, chances are that it might survive a turn. Does that factor in to your designs if you're Alpharius or Ghost Legionary? Certainly. With that 6 health, that actually means that they can survive a direct crack grenade. That's important too. I don't know how well you'd build around that. There might be better options, but as a stat line for a 5/6, that's a pretty good mid card for a deck. I don't dislike it. I don't know how useful it is. I just got Alpharius myself. I've seen a few Alpharius decks. I haven't played Alpharius enough, and obviously today I don't even have an Alpharius deck made, but I'm going to be playing around with it, and I might include Hydra's heads and see if that works. That might not be a bad thing at all. Now, this is actually, I can't say this is my favorite, but this is one of my favorite cards for the Alpha Legion. Number 1, it's a Thunderhawk, which is cool. Number 2, it's a tactic that deals damage. Okay, deal 4 damage, stun the target and adjacent units. This is their direct damage tactic. I think it's appropriately cost. It's a common, so it's very good. Even if you're just starting out with the Alpha Legion, you want to have 2 of these. The ability to deal 4 damage and stun from 1 to 3 units, depending on where you place it and what you're targeting, is crazy powerful. It's not broken powerful. given the Alpha Legion having less stuff that can do crazy damage, it actually buys them that time. It's the right level of power for them, but it's very important. You've got to have these cards, regardless of whatever your deck focus is. That stun, that damage, that is important to buying you the time that you need to pull off your final strategy. And regardless of the approach to Alpha Legion, I think all of them are late game final strategy approaches. There's not a single dominate early game. I mean, even the concept of utilizing Saboteur Squad on turn 4 and turn 5 in Asteroid Sanctuary, you've dominated the early game, but you can only reap that reward when you're at 10 energy and your opponent is at 7 energy. So that's important to note. Now, Legion, I've seen this used. I haven't been able to use it yet myself, and I like the effect of it. Put and play a copy of a friendly troop. It's a high cost card. It's actually, I mean, for 5 cost. But if you've already got a Headhunter squad out and they're stealthed, or a Hydra's head, you pay 5, you're getting a copy of it. You don't gain a rally effect. You're not gaining anything like that, but you're just gaining that troop. That includes these legendaries like Ifrit Squad or Covert Support, where all of a sudden maybe you're actually saving cost. And again, it's not playing it from your deck. It's a copy. I like that ability. You know what else this is useful for? Is if your opponent happens to have stumbled into your Alpha Order and given you a beefy guy. They give you a big beefy guy. And then you're like, well, thanks for the beefy guy. I'll go ahead and copy him, and then I'll use him on my side. And then you've got 2 of them, like Death Shroud or something like that. Although I don't know if copying Death Shroud is probably the best. You might want to solo Death Shroud. But that's a good card. It's got a crazy play style to it. I don't know how best to capitalize on it. I think if it was cost 4, I'd find an easier fit for it. But I like it. I like the potential that it has. So look to see that card. Now, Pale Spare is a legendary upgrade. This is one that I was talking about with regards to tying into your opponent drawing cards. Your Warlord gains deal 1 damage to the enemy Warlord when you draw a card. Not when they draw a card, but when you draw a card. So, Pale Spear with Alfarius' natural ability doesn't work. You're getting a copy of the card. At the start of your turn, drawing a card does work. Lectitio Divinatus does work. Hydra's Heads does work. Oh, I don't know. Orbital Base. I've got a hand of 7 cards. I've got Pale Spear on my Warlord, and I play Orbital Base, and I draw 7 cards. I deal 7 damage to my opponent's Warlord. And that's pretty potent. That's pretty damaging. There's no other way to say it. Now, how do you stop that? How do you reduce that effect? You don't. If you're the opponent, you try to find ways to not have your opponent draw more cards, or finish up the game. Early on, it's not going to do much. It's going to do a little ping or 2, but it doesn't take but 2 or 3 turns before that can really do some powerful stuff. Maybe if you're an Alpha Legion, you play Sleeper Operative. Or, as I say so many times, you employ the use of cards like Shield Generator to increase the cost of tactics by 2 or more. Now, that doesn't do much. It slows them down. But boy, I'll tell you, that goes not just with same with Pale Spear. Probably 50%, maybe even 60% of Alpha Legion decks are heavy tactic reliance. They just are. And if you've got Shield Generator out, that is going to throw a huge wrench in their plans. Please consider Shield Generator. If Alpha Legion is giving you trouble, consider Shield Generator. If Fulgrim's Changers is giving you trouble, consider Shield Generator. It is a big effect of a card. Yes, it affects both players, but sometimes if you know that it's going to hurt you, you can build around it. Your opponent cannot. Serpent Squad. This is game +1/+1 when you play tactic. Well, speaking of tactics, now their stat line doesn't start out great as a 4/4, but if you play a tactic when they come out, they're already a 5/5. And Secret orders, traps are tactics, so keep that in mind. Not a bad troop. In terms of the 5-cost troops, if I had to choose, I would go with Headhunter Squad over Serpent Squad. But I think Serpent Squad are not bad. And then again, it goes with what your deck is. If you're playing a certain deck, maybe you want Serpent Squad. Maybe you want Hydra's Heads instead. It really is just going to depend on what you're going for. Now, Covert Squad is a 6-drop, so they're pricey. The artwork is cool, but their ability is insane. This is actually, if this troop can survive one turn, the turn that they come out and play and your opponent doesn't have a response to it, you can lock a board down. When an enemy troop is put into play, stun it. That includes fast troops, troops with flank, troops with a rally effect will still get their rally effect, but they're stunned. And that is going to do so many things for you. Number one, they can play Ornitov's Barge, and that entire barge board is stunned, and that's going to stun it on your turn and then on their turn, and they still can't use it. So that's powerful. That buys you a lot of time. A lot of time. And if you've got Covert Squad with Secret Orders, that's all the time you need to put some orders down on the table. Or maybe they thought they would do a killing blow with gold stones, and they can't. All of a sudden it's stunned, and now you've got a covert support who can just do his damage to the Warlord. Great card. You have to time it when you play it and know what you're playing up against, but it's a very, very powerful card. Here's another legendary Ifrit Squad. These guys are great. Low stat lines, but they're stealth when they come in, and they stay stealth. And you're not going to use them for their stat lines. More than anything, you're probably going to use them to stay alive with that 5 health. 1 energy, deal 4 damage to the enemy Warlord. That cannot be understated how powerful that is. This is just sitting in stealth until your opponent either breaks the stealth or hits it with enough random damage energy. And until it does, it's going to do 4 damage to your opponent's Warlord every turn. And it only takes 2, maybe even 3 turns. That's 12 damage. And it, combined with whatever else you've got out there, that is just a great effect, great ability, great legendary. So if you see these guys, I think they fit in any Alpha Legion deck. Any Alpha Legion deck whatsoever. They're worth having. They're worth having. Don't pass on them. Hydra's Eyes. Now, when your opponent draws a card, deal 1 damage to the enemy Warlord. And then we're getting into the costly range. These guys are possessed Marines because, again, the Alpha Legion are, while they didn't turn to chaos, they're willing to utilize any and all methods necessary to win the war. And maybe some were possessed, maybe not. That's open for debate. There's a lot of secrets to the Alpha Legion. We'll never know. But these guys factor into that hole when your opponent draws a card, deal 1 damage to the enemy Warlord. They're high cost, though. Early on, depending on where you're at with your rarities and your levels, you might opt for Hydra's Eyes. But as time goes on, I think the more troops that you can field under cost 6, the better. The Instrument. Now, this is an epic. This is not necessarily the Pride of the Emperor or the Vengeful Spirit for the Alpha Legion. The Heroine is actually more in the vein of that. But this is a very powerful card, very crucial. And again, it goes into the stun concept. Number 1, stun a unit. And it deals its attack damage to adjacent units. So that means not only can you take that high powerful troop and stun it, you can potentially cleave its attack to your opponent's Warlord and a troop next to it, or the 2 troops next to it, wherever it's sitting. You can disrupt a front line, you can disrupt your opponent's Warlord, you can disrupt their next turn plan if you want to aim for a particular troop. You could technically use it to stun your opponent's Warlord to clear out their troops next to them, because this is a unit. So it does work on your opponent's Warlord. It won't deal any damage to them, but it will do 2 plus whatever attack that they're up to the troops next to it. For a 6 cost, as a legendary, it's powerful. It's not always, but it's a high potential to be the one that ends the game, because nobody expects it, or by the time that they think that they've countered for it, you just can't. You can't counter for that. And this is, again, ties into your opponent has got to keep in mind when they place their stuff. They can't be placing those high attack stuff right next to the warlord. They've got to place them as far away as possible. Now, Camiller Squad, these guys have got a rally, stun an enemy, and then for 2, they can stun an enemy troop, which means that they can't utilize their stat line, but that rally, stun an enemy, good. Ability, stun an enemy troop, good. Cost, high. Depending on where your level you're playing at, they're not a bad troop to have. I think they're pretty good until you get to higher options. I like them. I just like being able to stun stuff on command on rally as a 7 cost stunning, and then having that 6/8 on there on your side of the table. That's just powerful stuff. And they're not, because it's a rally effect, it's not something that your opponent really wants to Melgator back into your hand. Because if they Melgator, you're just going to stun it again, and you've still got this beefy guy again out on your next turn. Now, Ophian Scorpius, I like the ability, but I pass on it. I pass on it just because of the cost, and ultimately, at this point in the game where I'm playing at, I think it's a tad slower. It deals 2 damage to 3 random enemies, so it's not going... I don't think it does 2 damage to the same enemy if there's only 1 enemy on the table. I have yet to utilize that to find out for sure. I like the stat lines, and if that's the case, I mean, I might as well just attack for 7 on it. It's a vehicle that can survive a crag grenade, so that's good. But I just... I would opt for something else for what I have available. If you don't have a whole lot available and you're looking for a closer, this can put a lot of good pressure on the board for you. But then so can Camarilla Squad. If I had to choose between the 2, I would probably go with the Camarilla Squad. I like the stun. I like that rally effect. Now here's a good one here. This guy's got a front line, and he stuns any enemy damaged by this troop, which means anything that tries to go after him to kill him, they might kill him on the next turn, but 2 to 3 troops, or the 1 big troop that kills him and survives, is going to be stunned. He buys some time. And again, he's frontline, and the Alpha Legion needs some frontline. Does he go into every deck? Probably not. As an 8 cost, sometimes you want to be able to play several card options as opposed to 1 big card option, but he is a good card option to have. I've seen him in the event decks. The Alpha Legion event decks have been... they've been good decks, but they've both been in events with the Iron Hands, with Duquesne, and that is just a brutal deck to face. It's a very hard deck. I think you could win a game, but that's with like having perfect draws and your opponent not drawing what they wanted to, or the relentless effects not triggering how they wanted to trigger. So again, a good card for a event deck. I don't know if it goes to every deck. Learning Terminators deal 1 damage to the enemy warlord when you draw a card. So these are kind of like a higher cost troop version of Pale Spear. As an 8/8/8, that's a good stat line. But if I had to choose between any 8 cost cards going in my deck, I'm going to have the Harrowing. Either I'm going to have 1 or I'm going to have 2. You can have 2. And this deals 1 damage to all enemies for each card in your opponent's hand. And if you played your game right, again, your late game, and you fed cards into your opponent's hand, or you've made it hard for them to play cards because of Saboteur Squad, Asteroid Sanctuary, and you're at turn, you're at energy 7 or 8, and they're at energy, they'd be 3 behind you, energy 5, and they've got a handful of useless cards, 10 cards, let's say, you can do 10 damage to their entire board. And that's powerful. That's mean. On the other hand, if you are facing Alpha Legion, you need to be aware that Harrowing exists, and that means play your cards as quickly as possible. Try not to draw cards if you can help it, especially if it looks like your opponent is forcing you to draw cards, and count that the Harrowing is going to happen when you don't want it to happen. I've seen the Harrowing executed for 9 or 10 damage, and I've done it, and then there have been those times where the Harrowing has just been 2 to 3 damage because the cards have been played out. So as an 8 cost, having 2 copies of those sometimes is important, because if your opponent plays around it, it's a dead card in your hand. You're paying a huge cost for very little return, or you're paying a huge cost for a good value that you built your game around and built up to play. And again, that's the long game. It doesn't do 20 damage, it doesn't do 30 damage, it can do 10 damage, and that's high, but that's a perfect, all factors perfect on your side of the table. And 10 card hands do exist, but they don't exist that often. Now it's important to note, for all these cards that are counting cards in your opponent's hand, the Harrowing, the cards that say five or more cards, initially when the Alpha Legion came out, there was an issue with the game, and they were not counting cards such as Secret Twin or Whispers of Chaos or Reckoning cards. Those do count. Those do count towards the hand. So if you actually tap on your opponent's deck in a battle, it'll tell you cards in hand or opponent's cards in hand. That includes those cards. So that has been fixed. And so if they've got 5 cards, which includes their Reckoning, it will do 5 damage. It won't do 4. Now, Attilan's score, I would probably say he's one of the best 9-drops in the game, if you ask me, because he's got an immediate effect, and it is such a powerful effect. Rally, deal 3 damage to the enemy warlord, stun all enemy troops. That is nothing that your opponent wants to Melgator back into your hand. That is nothing that they can stop, and it gives you a 9 attack guy out there on the table. And if you've played any game, you know how that it affects late game at the turn 9. If they've got 2 or 3 troops that are waiting for the kill, you drop that down there. Now they can't do anything about it, and they know that they have to deal with your 9 attack guy on their turn, or it is game over. I would probably say he is the number 1 legendary to get. If you see him in the shop, pick him up. Number 2 legendary, probably the Instrument, and then followed by Ifrit Squad, Bronzy, and then Pale Spear. And I only say Pale Spear last because Pale Spear is for a niche deck. It is the one that you wouldn't just include it in every deck. You've got to build your deck around a concept that Pale Spear benefits from. You can't build it around Pale Spear, but Pale Spear benefits from the concept that the rest of your deck is already being built around. Now, Legion Glaive, not a bad 10-drop. It's a big tank, and it is a frontline 10-10, and then rally enemy tactics cost 4 more until your next turn. Now compare that to the Lernia Hydra, which is, I think, 1 cost less, right? Nope, it's 2 cost less. 1 attack less, 2 health less, and tactics cost 2 more. So for 2 energy more, you're getting better on everything, and it's an Alpha Legion card. It is a 10-drop, which means that that's all you're going to be able to do. However, if you can pull that off at the right moment when you're expecting something, that shuts off the ability for your opponent to properly play, properly juggle a Pride of the Emperor. They can't benefit as much from a Vengeful Spirit because I don't think it puts them over the cost of 10. I haven't seen that in a long time. I think they've done it where anything is cost is increased that caps at 10. So if you're playing it at turn 10, they're still going to be able to play Vengeful Spirit, but it's going to take all their energy. However, you could get lucky and get these guys with abandoned supplies and play them at turn 8. You could also play them at turn 8 thanks to the technical servitors. You could do a few things. And if anything, at the very least, it's going to buy you a turn. Because now that Destroy a card, that Perfection's Flight or that Outflank, cost them 9 energy just to get rid of this. So regardless of the case, they're going to burn a whole turn just to get rid of this one troop, whether it's through a tactic or through everything that they've got on the board, because this is a frontline troop. So once again, they have to deal with it. Just a powerful card. I don't know if it's an auto-include. But I do think that it is one that I would include if I don't have enough cards or if I'm looking for a good closer. It's a good closer. The Harrowing is probably your easiest card to close with, but hardest to bank on. Because if anything, you can probably bank around like a 4 or 5, maybe a 6 damage. If you built your deck around the concept of the Harrowing, then you can go for higher value. But you can't build around it being a guarantee. Whereas like Vengeful Spirit or Pride of the Emperor, you know that if you draw that, you hit that 8 health range, it's game over. So that is the Alpha Legion. We've gone through everything here with the Alpha Legion card pool. I really think, again, that they're not a top level Legion right now. I think they have the tools available to them. I think people are still new, still feeling it out. They play different than anything that's out there because of the nature of their effects, because of the nature of tactics of troops and secret orders, and that forces your opponents to play differently. And I'm all about forcing new things into the game. I think it's very important. I don't think they need to be heavily tweaked. I think, if anything, there might be some things that could be improved here. And I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that happen. But I think they're really fun. I don't think any game I played, whether I played with Peck against another Alpha Legionary or I played a non-Alpha deck against Alpha Legionary, every game against Alpha Legion is different. It's fun. It's nice. It's refreshing. It's so much better than just another Angron head smash deck. Anytime there's something new to the game, I like it. It can get frustrating if you get that secret order lockdown happening. There's not much you can do about it except eat it. And if you know that if your opponent reveals their secret identity is Peck, play cautiously. If they reveal your secret identity is Alfarius, start putting cards on the table quickly. If they reveal that their secret identity is Dynat, I don't know where that goes. I don't know what they're going to do with that. Maybe they're doing that just to stun your troops at bay. I don't know, but work quickly, because the Alpha Legion's health is fragile early to mid game. Even with perfect swings with one of many, you can still beat an Alpha Legion if they don't get their long game plan set up, or if you don't play into their trap. If you can dodge the noose, regardless of what they try to do, you can win against Alpha Legion. And it makes for a really fun game. And if you lose against Alpha Legion, you should still at least be able to appreciate that your opponent played it right. Yes, there's some random factors to it. There's some random factors to every game. I think every deck utilizes at least one card of randomness, whether they want to admit it or not, whether it's Defensive Satellites, Mortar Strike, Alpha Thigh Theta, any card that generates a random card, Chaos, Marks of Chaos, anything that's random in a deck. Alpha Legion just happen to have more of those. Some of them are highly powerful, but they're not all reliable. And if they can manage to pull off a win of that, you should be able to appreciate it. And if you are playing Alpha Legion and you start to pull off wins with Alpha Legion, you should be proud of yourself, pat yourself on the back, number one, for taking a step in a new direction, and number two, because that's a very good sign that you are understanding your deck and how it works, and you're making new things happen. So that's all I've said. I think I've gone on long. Oh, my challenge is up. What do I got? What do I got here? I think I've said all I can say about the Alpha Legion, and it's all good things. They're all fun. It's taken me a while to get to this point. I wanted to wait to see if they were going to do any tweaks. They've done some game tweaks with the economy and everything we've already talked about. They haven't done any tweaks to the Alpha Legion. We might still see those down the road, but for the time being, they're very fun. And if you have the chance, give them a chance. Give them a try, and keep playing Legions. And that's it. We'll talk to you guys next time. All right, bye.